Exeter started, from all the murals in 1888 when the railroad came through. And think about that. That railroad started in the Fresno area in the spring, and it's a crew of Chinese track layers who had also participated in going through the mountains to make the transcontinental railroad. So these guys knew how to lay tracks. They were doing 1.5 miles a day. And so they were, after the mountains, this flat valley was a piece of cake. So they're rolling in July of 88 is when they hit Exeter, and they keep going to Porterville. Well, that's part of my story today, is what happened after that. But they brought, goes to advance. Imagine what it was like in 1888, hot, but flat. This place was described as flat as a billiard table, and only fit for sheep. Anybody who would come here had to be a lunatic, is what they were saying in 1888. It was pretty much John Fireball, wheat fields, sheep, hogs, and cattle. That house there is taken a lot later, but that allegedly was the house that John Fireball lived in when the railroad guys rolled in. And Daniel Parkhurst is saying, hey, listen, we'll buy 240 acres of land and we'll turn it into a town. But it made John Fireball instantly wealthy. But the other thing, I want to take a quick break and you give people some context, because this was all new to me. A little bit of history is they had after the Transcontinental Railroad, they started, the railroad folks wanted people to live here. They wanted people to grow stuff so they could ship it on their trains. They wanted passengers. They wanted towns so they could ship lumber to, and goods and food and all that kind of stuff. So they started promoting California in the East. And so they would write these glowing articles about the land of milk and honey in Central California. Get on a train. We will sell you a ticket for $10. They're discounted, these tickets. They're so cheap. And it was so enticing. And so one of the things I wanted to do is actually read a very quick, short clip of what some of the things they were writing back then. Is the headline is "A prosperous and growing young foothill city." 2 years ago, the site was a large sheep ranch. The transformation that has taken place in 2 years is amazing. And they go on about what a new town, we're going to have a ditch go through here, so there'll be water, and there'll eventually be a trading post for the mountains. And they say 2 years ago there was one saloon, a post office. Now there's 50 residences and business houses, and some of them are substantial buildings. They talk about Everett and Stevens, the first goods store, the Kirkman store, pioneer store of the town. George Olds had a blacksmith shop. Carmen had the first hotel. There was a Granger's warehouse, and there was Judge Kirk, the Justice of the Peace, had a special office where justice is meted out with a fair hand. And there was a constable and a guy with a livery stable, and then John Fireball supplied everybody with milk in town. And they've got a nice, spacious depot at the railroad's agent. So all these different things, and then, but it would go on, and they would print these in Eastern newspapers so that people are looking at those thinking there's opportunity in California, the land of milk and honey. But there's another little kind of backstory that is also relevant, is that in 1820s, there was a revival in America. They called it the Second Great Awakening. And it started with a guy named Finney, Charles Grandison Finney, back east. And they were having these conversion meetings, thousands and thousands and thousands of people converting to Christianity, and huge growth in church. In the early 1800s, only 10% of the people went to church. By 1870, 70% are involved in a church. huge impact. Well, what that meant was all these new Christians wanted their kids to know how to read the Bible. And so America during that time became the most literate country in the history of the world. Never had there been such a high percentage of people who could read, because all these converted Christians are going, we want our kids to read the Bible. The other thing that happened about the same time is they invented the steam-powered printing press. So you got all these people who want to read. Now we got to give them stuff to read. We got to print Bibles, but we also print newspapers and books. And so it was a huge growth in newspapers. And then also in 1845 is when the telegraph started. So you could transfer information instantly all across the country. Well, that meant that newspapers in California could carry a story in Chicago or back east somewhere, and vice versa. So they would send all these newspaper stories about California back east to Missouri and Kansas, Kentucky and Arkansas. But the other aspect of that was life-changing was all these new Christians then became abolitionists. And it began that whole movement to end slavery. And then it also meant that was when the women's suffrage movement started as a result of these converted Christians. And in addition to that,